Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. Broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, Sundays at 8:30, repeated at 4, and then at 4:30 you get last week's episode shown to you again. Also, check my site, that's the Voice for Liberty at wichitaliberty.org. You'll find all the old episodes, show notes, and all the other material that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So today, we're beginning our look at the candidates for the November general election in Kansas. We have almost all the governor candidates scheduled, both candidates for our local congressional district scheduled. And today, our first guest is Greg Orman, who is an independent running for the governorship of Kansas. His running mate is John Dahl, a Kansas State Senator from Great Bend, who is now an independent, but recently was a Republican. And as a reminder, last day to register to vote, October 17th, and then the election on November 6th. So, Greg Orman, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Happy to be here.
And give us the short 2-minute pitch as to why Kansans should vote for you for governor.
Well, you know, I think most Kansans realize intuitively that something has gone wrong over the last 10 years. And I believe that what happens over the next 4 years is really going to determine the path our state's on for the next couple of decades. You know, I've got a couple of young daughters. I'd like to see my daughters and all our sons and daughters and grandchildren feel inspired to build their lives in Kansas. To do that, I think we need to put the state on a very different path, and that's what our campaign is all about.
Mm-hmm. So, you are an independent, so that means you did not seek the nomination of one of our three parties, the two majors and the minor, but instead filed through petitions to become a candidate on the ballot. And you've made statements, I think, about I'm a political independent for one simple reason. I don't believe the current system is working, about the parties fight and want to defeat the other party more than they want to win something positive. Is the two-party system broken and in need of repair, and how would an independent governor fix that?
You know, I think it is deeply flawed right now. I mean, you look at what's happened not only in Kansas but across the country. You know, it's been 2 decades since the average American household has seen a pay increase. Mm-hmm. You know, think about that. 1999 was the last time median household income really grew in America. And so for the average American household, they've gone the amount of time it takes a young child from being born to graduating from high school since they've gotten a pay increase. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, the things we spend so much money on, health care, higher education, child care, have all outstripped the rate of inflation by multiples. Mm-hmm. And, you know, so for the average American household, it doesn't feel like you're treading water. It feels like you're drowning. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is a direct result of a two-party system that feathers their own nests and ignores festering national problems.
Mm-hmm. So the two-party system very entrenched. I mean, when your running mate, Senator Dahl, joined the independent, well, it's not a party, but joined your candidacy, he was disciplined, right, by the Republicans.
I don't know that he was disciplined so much as under the Republican rules, they're required to allocate their committee spots to people who are Republicans. Mm-hmm. And so they had to remove him from his committees. But the other thing that happened when Senator Dahl did that, what he said was it was liberating. He said he didn't feel shackled anymore. He didn't feel the obligation to toe the party line. He could do what was in the best interest of his district, what was in the best interest of his constituents, without worrying about how he was going to impact a party or the party leaders. And John described it to me as incredibly liberating to be able to be an independent.
Mr. Orman, let me build on that a little bit, because we've got a situation where Governor Brownback, who had overwhelmingly Republican majorities in both houses, had the major fiscal legislation, a tax increase, come before his desk. He vetoes it, and his veto is overridden. Now, as a practical matter, if you're elected as an independent, the Republicans won't be backing you, the Democrats won't be backing you. Would you be hamstrung by the fact that you would not have a party supporting you legislatively in the Kansas House or Senate?
You know, I've heard that question a lot, and I actually think as an independent, it would liberate me to govern in a way that no other candidate can. And, you know, what I describe it to people is it's not that I don't have a natural support base, it's that I don't have a natural enemy base. And, you know, so often in politics today, an idea advanced by one side is dead on arrival with the other because, you know, as you mentioned, Bob, in your opening, I believe that both parties are more interested in seeing the other party fail than they are in seeing our country or our state succeed. And so I think if you elected a Democrat governor, as an example, I think the Republicans in the legislature would be hard-pressed to want to give that person a win. I think if you elected a Republican, there'd be fighting as well. And sort of the type you've described with Brownback. I think I, however, have the ability to work with both sides, to listen, and ultimately to do it in an environment where they don't feel like they're threatening their electoral prospects, because they're not running against an independent for re-election. They're running against generally a Democrat or a Republican. And so, working with me to do things to improve the state of Kansas, I think is something they would do. The other thing I would say is I have talked to the only independent governor in America right now, Bill Walker, and he said the same thing. He said being an independent really has allowed him to serve the state of Alaska in ways that no other governor can. Alaska had a huge fiscal issue. For the first time in a long time, they had to reduce the dividend. Everybody in Alaska gets paid to live in Alaska. Yeah. But because of declining oil revenues from Prudhoe Bay, they didn't have the money to pay it. That was something a Republican wasn't willing to do. It was something a Democrat wasn't willing to do because they didn't want to bring their whole party down with them. He went out and made the brave and courageous decision to do what he thought was in the best interest of his state, and he would have only been able to do that as an independent.
Mm-hmm. Let's take a couple of moments off for our first commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks with Karl Peterjohn. Our guest today, Greg Orman, independent candidate for Kansas governor. And Karl, you had a follow-up?
Yes, you talked about the challenge that an independent can handle. What would you identify as the top 3 issues that Kansas faces that you'd take on if you were living in Cedar Crest come next January?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm not sure my wife will let me live in Cedar Crest, but regardless, I think the biggest single issue facing our state is a demographic challenge. We're aging as a state, our young people are moving out, and I think the only way we address that really is by growing the Kansas economy. So I think our number one challenge is getting the Kansas economy back in the position where it grows at least as fast as our neighboring states, and it's been lagging behind for quite some time right now.
It's been one of the lowest in the country, in fact.
Yeah, for quite some time. And so
tax hikes have that tendency to do that.
Well, and I'm a business owner. I've spent my life building companies. I've been in those boardrooms when we've made decisions on where to locate plants and factories, and taxes certainly factor into it, but so do other things. Workforce is a big part of that. I would never move a company somewhere where I didn't think I had a stock of workers that was going to be able to help us grow. And so, we have a very proactive plan for growing the Kansas economy. We've actually released it. It's available on my website that focuses on leveraging our strengths, eliminating obstacles to economic development, workforce development, and ultimately addressing Kansas's reputational deficit.
Well, what's our main strength and what's our main weakness?
I think our main strength right now is geographic centrality. We're sitting in the middle of the United States at a time when our economy is quickly moving from a bricks and mortar to a distributed economy. Mm-hmm. We've got 3 Class 1 railroads that travel through the state. We've got a workforce that's hardworking, but we can leverage that geographic centrality in this environment to become the distribution and the intermodal manufacturing capital of America. Another strength that we clearly have is a hardworking population. The Kansans are hard workers, and that's a big deal from a business perspective. And then, finally, we've got leadership in agriculture, aviation, life sciences, engineering. There are a lot of right things about Kansas, and so there's a lot that can be leveraged here.
Well, we've had those for the last few years, and in terms of economic growth, if you go to the Wichita Liberty site, there's great data showing that we're still lagging behind not only our neighboring states, but the rest of the country.
It's because we haven't had a proactive plan to grow our economy. As you and I talked about on the break, I talked to one of the heads of strategy for one of the Class 1 railroads who had just built an intermodal in Texas. When I asked him why he didn't build it in Kansas, he said it would take us twice as long. And so what we've talked about is local regulatory compacts, saying to local areas of government, look, if you're willing to agree to certain time frames to go through these regulatory processes so that businesses have certainty for when their investments are going to yield results, we'll target economic development and highway dollars to you. We need to make it a somewhat of a quid pro quo to say, look, we're going to have this proactive strategy, but every area of government has to participate for us to be successful.
When you say highway, are you talking about a new highway plan?
What I'm talking about is highway dollars, and ultimately, we've obviously got lots of priorities in that area, but it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to invest in infrastructure to support an industry that ultimately won't develop without the support of local bodies of government. And so, I think we need to tell people there are some strings attached.
I think your paper, from what I've read, and I think you mentioned it, you talked about the reputational problems in Kansas. That's something I think we've had kind of for a long time, but has it become different in the past years?
Look, I look at this and I go back to William Allen White, who at one time said, he was the first author of the phrase, "What's the matter with Kansas?" Ultimately, Thomas Frank borrowed that in his book. But William Allen White also said, whenever anything is going to happen in America, it happens first in Kansas. Populism, the bull moose, prohibition, all of those movements started in Kansas. It's safe to say that the issue that brought the nation to the brink of the Civil War was whether or not Kansas would be admitted as a free state. Mm-hmm. We used to be a leader. We used to be a place that other states looked to for inspiration. Now we're a cautionary tale. As governor, I believe it's one of my responsibilities to be the chief spokesperson and chief salesperson for the state. We've got to get people talking about what's right about Kansas and not what's the matter with Kansas. And there's a lot right about Kansas. And that's what I want to go out and sell to the American people so we can change that narrative, so that we can get people to move here, we can get businesses to move here, and we can, celebrate what's really great about our state.
And we talk a lot about that in Wichita. We've got a number of initiatives right now, the Project Wichita, the Chung Report, all this going on to try to get Wichitans to think better about our town. And I think it's working a bit, but sometimes the data isn't exactly following. Anyway, let's take another commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back again to Wichita Liberty TV. Bob Weeks with Karl Peterjohn, our guest, Greg Orman, independent candidate for governor. Greg, I wanted to ask about the independent thing once again.
Sure.
It seems like we've got Republicans over here. I guess maybe it depends which way you're looking at. Democrats over here. I have a feeling it's a little bit naive and simplified to say that an independent's in the center. It's really different than that, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, being independent is about three things. It's about putting my state and my country ahead of a political party. And, as we've talked about, I think so often the parties seem more interested in seeing the other party fail than they seem interested in our state or our country succeeding. It's about using facts and common sense to solve problems, not clinging to rigid ideologies, often despite all evidence that they're failing. I have been asked a lot during this race about the Brownback tax experiment, and I say, the biggest failure there was when the evidence came in and suggested it wasn't working. We didn't change course. I'm a private sector guy. I believe that I got to reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow than I am today. And so, again, using facts and common sense is a part of that. And then the third thing is, I don't want to feel an obligation to party bosses or special interests. And so we won't take money from PACs, we won't take money from lobbyists, we won't take money from corporations. I want to go to Topeka and represent the people of Kansas.
Let me jump in because they're talking about as an independent. I've heard you described and perhaps described yourself as a socially moderate, fiscally conservative person. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think that's a general characterization that would be fair.
Then let me follow up. There are 5 candidates on the ballot. Sometimes the libertarians are kind of categorized as socially moderate and fiscally conservative. How would you differentiate yourself from not only the Republicans, Democrats, but the Libertarian and the other independent that's on the ballot?
Well, I think in a couple of ways. One is, I think so often in politics today we're drawing from failed playbooks with answers and solutions that might have worked 20 years ago but don't work today. And so if you look at my economic development plan, you look at the plan that we released on transparency, effectiveness, and accountability, you'll see that we've got a lot of new thinking for how we want to solve problems. A great way to characterize it would be to look at the education debate going on right now. I've heard a lot of people on the right say we need competition, we need to go to private school vouchers. There's one private high school west of Wichita, so I'm not sure a private school voucher solves a problem for a kid in Colby, Kansas. We've heard on the other side, we need to pour hundreds of millions or billions of dollars more money into the top of the funnel. I'd like to look at the root cause of the problem. And if you look at the achievement gap between low-income kids and high-income kids, 2/3 of it's caused by the summer learning deficit. And so I want more targeted solutions.
Well, can the governor really play a role at this point? Because we've got a Kansas Supreme Court that's basically, in a sense, taken over fiscal policy for the portion of the state's budget for K through 12 education, and the governor and the legislatures had to basically dance to their tune.
Yeah, there's no question the courts have sort of defined what has to happen in 2019 to meet their eye. But the reality is we're looking at what we're going to do in education in the next decade and beyond. And so, in 2020, we're going to have to come up with ways to close that achievement gap. It's going to still exist regardless of the additional dollars that we put in. We're still going to see opportunities to improve education. The other thing I would say, though, to your point about what makes me different, again, I think so often we think of the governor's job as a policy job. And the reality is, as much as anything, it's a management job. Exactly. You've got 165 partners in policy in the legislature. But as governor, you're responsible for running a $16 billion organization with 17,000 employees that touches the lives of hundreds of thousands of people every year. I'm the only candidate in this race that has any management experience approximating organizations of the size and the scale of our state agencies. I've got a track record of successfully building businesses. I've got a track record of successfully hiring the best and the brightest people to help move those businesses forward. That's what the governor's job is. First and foremost, we're hiring a CEO for the state. And I think if you look at it on a resume basis and you say who's got the experience to run the state, even look at the two major candidates. You've got one who has no management experience, and you've got the other one who has, in some senses, a track record of incompetent management experience. Getting fined, running into trouble. It doesn't, having issues with their administration. And so, again, I think the biggest thing that differentiates me is not just my approach to politics, not just having innovative policies, but having the experience to be able to manage an organization the size and the scale of the state of Kansas.
Well, because the governor makes an awful lot of appointments and has an awful lot of levers they can pull, but the challenge for many of them is to be able to communicate out to the public. And as an independent candidate, the tools you'd have, I think, would be a real challenge going forward.
Governor Brownback has even apologized to Republicans, anyway, in a Republican setting, that he did not sell his tax cuts as well as he should have, right, Karl? We've been
that's
to meetings
true,
with him of that.
And it wasn't reported that by the end of his term, Governor Brownback signed a major tax increase into place, so you can say he did change his policy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's take our last commercial break for today. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back again to our last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for this week. Bob Weeks, Karl Peterjohn, independent candidate for governor, Greg Orman. So The next governor is probably going to preside over redistricting, drawing all of our state legislative districts plus the 4 congressional districts. The legislature failed to get that the last time. They just couldn't pass a bill, and the districts were drawn by a federal judge. How would you propose we do our redistricting next time?
Well, as an independent, I've actually been deeply involved in what I'd call the political reform community, trying to change those things. So much of our politics today, it's the fox in charge of the hen house. It's the only duopoly I know of where the duopolists get to write the rules of competition. Mm-hmm. I'd far prefer to see our redistricting lines drawn by a computer. Okay. The idea that we're having politicians pick their voters
right.
and not voters picking their elected leaders, I think is sort of a reversal of what democracy really should be. And so, mm-hmm. I'm a big believer that we need to make reforms to level the playing field, to take the fox and say you're no longer in charge of securing the hen house, and ultimately I think that would lead to better results. That's the problem with a rigged political system. Rigged politics leads to rigged policies. Mm-hmm. And you look at what happened in 2016 when so many Americans went to unconventional choices in the political election and the presidential election. I think what we're hearing very clearly from Americans is this system of government isn't working for us. In fact, 85% of Americans now believe Washington is a rigged game that only benefits those people who can buy access to power.
Well, the 2 biggest areas of state government's involved, and leaving aside the national, is education and Medicaid. I'm curious, do you support expansion of Medicaid? And a 2-part question. There's been a lot of controversy about how much money we should spend on K-12. How much money should be spent per pupil to provide a suitable education, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, let me answer the first question first about Medicaid. So I think we send a terrible message to people in Kansas who are working and don't make a lot of money. And that is, if you get sick, quit your job. Because to qualify for Medicaid in Kansas, you have to earn under 38% of the federal poverty line. If you earn over 138%, you qualify for subsidies through the Affordable Care Act. And so if you're somewhere in the middle, we basically tell you you're out of luck. So a single working mother making $10 an hour with 2 kids, if she gets sick, we tell her to quit her job. I believe that's not the message we want to send. I think we want to give people pathways to improve their lives, to be bigger contributors to society. So I would expand Medicaid, but I would do it in a way that doesn't cost the state money. And I think we can do that by saying as you earn more money, you have to participate in the cost of your care. I think we should go to a direct primary care model. We've seen that in other parts of the state. Garden City, as an example, has done that with their city employees.
Oh, really?
In over 5 years, they've seen a decline in their health care costs when the rest of us have seen an increase.
Well, so Wichita is the home of Atlas MD,
Yep.
Josh Umber, who's really a pioneer in that field, I believe.
And I think we can deliver it through physicians' practices, through community health centers, through PAs.
Because frankly, to be blunt about it, every state that's expanded Medicaid has experienced significant financial burdens and hiccups, even though the feds are still reimbursing at 100%, and at some point they're going to diminish that. So
they're going to go down to 90 soon.
At some point, it was supposed to happen, but they've kicked the can down the road.
Yeah.
My point is that government involvement, Obamacare or socialized medicine, trying to push us towards single payer, and there are a lot of folks out there trying to do that. Is going to be a huge fiscal challenge if you proceed down that road.
Well, and again, that's why I think we have to do it in a creative way. We have to have a Kansas plan for this that recognizes that we have to do it with the resources we have. The other thing I would say, though, is it's a huge workforce development issue. Well, someone making $13 an hour in Colorado gets health care with it. Someone making $13 an hour in Kansas doesn't. And
jobs, there's some low-paying jobs that have great health packages, some higher-paying jobs that don't. And it's some potpourri.
Yeah, no question, a mixed bag. But that's my point of view. And again, I think healthcare. Look, I look at the whole healthcare system. Warren Buffett described it as the tapeworm that's eating the American economy. I'm a business owner. Every year, before we decide what kind of raises we can give to our employees, we have to first ask, what are we paying in healthcare premium increases? And so for me, I think we got to get under the issue of incentives with healthcare. It's the only industry I know of where you get paid to fix your own mistakes. You know, think about it. Someone paints your house, they get the trim color wrong. When they come back and fix the trim color, they don't send you another bill.
Well, government sometimes has that problem. Let me jump back, since we're down to under 30 seconds. Do you have a figure in terms of how much you think needs to be spent per pupil to provide a suitable education and be constitutional in Kansas?
You know, again, I think the Supreme Court has given us guidelines and has said what the legislature has done, if it's inflation adjusted, is acceptable. I would rather look at this a different way and basically say, how do we deliver the best education to kids? It's not always about spending the most money. You know, my wife is a high school teacher. She taught in an inner city school district. They saw a significant increase in their graduation rate simply by changing the radius with which they would pick up kids in the school buses. You know, a simple change to transportation policy had a huge effect on outcome. And that's why I think we need to look at the root cause of these problems. We need to focus on it like a business person would focus on solving a problem. And ultimately, I think we can deliver better results without having to spend a lot more money.
Okay, well, we're going to turn the lights out on us, Karl, here pretty soon. So, Greg Orman, thanks very much for appearing today. We'll have
pleasure.
The show will be broadcast soon and on wichitaliberty.org as well. Thanks again, Karl. Thanks again, Mr. Orman. We'll see you next week.